Hey everybody, welcome back. So we had just finished talking about how Louis Pasteur developed the swan neck flask and how the flask allowed air to get in but kept bacteria from being able to get into the broth. And so once you boiled the infusions, the broth could be set for years and years. The only way the broth would become contaminated was if you allowed the broth itself to move into the neck or if you broke the flask neck off. And so this debunked spontaneous generation. But as I said, scientists once they do their experiment, they like to reproduce those experiments. So you have to replicate the experiments and support it multiple times before a hypothesis becomes a theory. And so once Pasteur published his results, scientists that were interested in his research, they tried to replicate it, but they didn't get the same results. And this discrepancy was actually able to be explained by two different individuals who did not work together, Tyndall and Cohn. So John Tyndall was an English physicist, and what he learned, and he did this by sterilizing different broths, was that the sterilized time was different for different types of organisms. There were organisms that you could boil the broth for hours and hours and the organisms wouldn't die. There was other broths that if you boiled for 5 minutes, the organisms were all dead. And so he realized that some types of hay contained heat-resistant microbes. So now we know that there are two types of microbes out there. There are non-heat resistant microbes, these are known as vegetative cells. And then there were heat resistant microbes, which we call endospores. A German botanist, Ferdinand Cohn, actually identified these heat resistant structures as endospores. And between the two of them, they help to explain why other scientists who were doing research specifically out of their barns were getting different results than Louis Pasteur got. So now we know that microbes exist and that life comes from life. So now let's talk about the importance of microorganisms. So I like to talk about the importance of microbes before we talk about all the harm that microbes can do. And the reason I do this is because the majority of microbes on Earth are beneficial to the Earth. Life depends on microbial activity. Remember, it was microorganisms that produce the atmosphere that allows animals and plants to be here. But today, when we think of important activities, nitrogen fixation occurs by microorganisms. So we have bacteria that live in the roots of certain plants, and they actually fix nitrogen from the air. So nitrogen in the air can't be taken in by plants. But these bacteria can fix the nitrogen and pull the nitrogen in so that the plants can use it. Of course, we have microbes that produce oxygen, those photosynthetic organisms like cyanobacteria, that produce the oxygen, the original oxygen that was in the Earth's atmosphere. So our original Earth atmosphere did not contain oxygen. It wasn't until we had these photosynthetic organisms that produced oxygen as a byproduct that oxygen became part of our atmosphere. Microbes also degrade a lot of materials. So organic matter that we would have to clean up oftentimes is degraded by microbes. So there are multiple types of microbes that break down organic materials. In the woods, this happens all the time. This is natural. And then the breakdown materials can be taken into the soil and used to grow other organisms. But all these beneficial things, we do know that microbes have killed more people than any of our wars have ever killed. Microbes can be used as weapons and are often a threat of bioterrorism. So this is just a figure that I found. It's a Pearson figure, which, sorry, but it's a good figure, so I like it. So this is showing nitrogen in the air. It's taken in by nitrogen-fixing bacteria like Rhizobium. Rhizobium lives in little nodules inside of the legumes. And nitrogen can be fixed here. And then this allows plants to produce the different organic molecules that it needs. So you have this beautiful plant. Well, these plants then are going to be eaten by animals. And when that happens, the animals can take those nutrients and produce different amino acids or whatever they need. And when these organisms die, then we have these microbes that break down the organic materials. We have fungi, microbes, protozoans that help to do this, and convert it back into the ammonium that our plants can use, or we have denitrifying bacteria that can convert it into nitrogen gas again. So nutrients cycle, you probably remember that from your general biology class. And this is showing the cycle of nutrients for nitrogen, actually. This is another cool figure that I like that just shows photosynthesis. I don't know what I was going to say. I was going to say something really weird. And cell respiration. So this is a chloroplast. Plants have chloroplasts. Bacteria do not have chloroplasts, but they have bacteria chlorophyll. And they can still undergo photosynthesis, okay? But this is just an easy picture to use. So microbes like cyanobacteria as well as plants take sunlight in, take carbon dioxide from the air in, and they produce oxygen as a waste product as well as carbohydrates. Oxygen and carbohydrate are what we need for cell respiration. You take glucose and oxygen and you produce a lot of ATP energy and get rid of carbon dioxide as a waste product. Microbes are also used in producing foods. So we use yeast to produce bread. We use yeast to produce beers. We ferment milk into cheeses or yogurts. We use microbes for biodegradation. So biodegradation, basically we can break down organic materials that are damaging the environment using microbes. Microbes produce commercially important products, including antibiotics, which I always like to point out. We treat disease, bacterial infections, using antibiotics, some that come from bacteria. How crazy is that, right? We use microbes to produce proteins that we need. We use microbes, and so proteins like insulin. We use microbes to produce fuel, to produce certain types of items like diapers or headsets. We can even use microbes to produce insecticides. Our microbes have been used in biotechnology for a long time. Genetic engineering allows us to produce, put genes of one organism into another organism so that now the organism might be resistant to drought. So you might have a plant that can actually grow even when the environment is dry. Or you might have a plant that contains amino acids that it normally wouldn't have, or certain vitamins, or even certain types of antidiarrheal properties. So this is going to lead us into medical microbiology. So we've talked about some of the really beneficial aspects of microorganisms, which is always good to do before we talk about the problems that microbes have caused in the past. So I'm going to stop here and we'll get into our next video, which will be all about medical microbiology and disease in the next video. Bye.